Hi, it's Ann Parker. I'm a past national president today. I'm going to provide training to you on the 24-25 financial policies. These policies may be amended every year at our national convention. The purpose of the policy is to provide financial guidance to our chapters, our departments, and the national organization. These policies are non-negotiable, meaning they must be adhered to as written. Some of the policies deal entirely with the national organization, but chapters are to mirror the policies of the national organization. 1.0 is internal control policies. The national president appoints a finance committee each year. The purpose of that committee is to review all financial reports before they go to the National Executive Board for their acceptance and to make such other recommendations to the from the Finance Committee to the National Executive Board with regard to stocking the store and other expenditures. 1.2 talks about financial reports. Detailed financial reports will be submitted to the general membership of the organization, chapter, department, and national, no less than quarterly. However, if you can submit them monthly to your chapters, departments, is preferred, as that's what we do on the national level. These reports need to show clearly where the funds came from and who or what is being paid and why. 1.3, we ask that all chapters use FDIC or NCUA insured institutions. So it can be a credit union, and that's what the NCUA talks about. I would also ask you to make sure when you are getting a bank for your chapter or department that you use one that lets you do online banking, online bill pay, and making deposits online if at all possible. At the end of the fiscal year, the Blue Star Mothers National Bank account, we're to maintain a savings amount with a minimal balance of 50% of the subsequent year's budgeted expenses. On the chapter level, you may not have savings accounts, but this is a national stipulation. 1.4 says that 2 signatures are required on all checks. Your checks need to have the chapter state and number. For example, my chapter is Florida 10. So we would have on our checks Ocala Blue Star Mothers FL10. Signatures on your checks need to be the treasurer and the financial secretary. The first VP shall be added to the account signature card for emergency purposes only. Otherwise, it's just the two of them, the financial secretary and the treasurer, that write checks. Now, bill pay can be used, and that is simply a method of sending an electronic check. We use it on the national level a lot because we have officers in different parts of the country, and it would be very time consuming to send those checks across the country. So we use the bill pay in the following manner. We attend a meeting and a check is called for and approved by the membership or the national board. The treasurer would institute an email based on the minutes of the meeting to the national financial secretary or the chapter or department financial secretary saying she's going to institute a bill pay for a certain amount as described in the minutes of the meeting on a certain date, and she asks the financial secretary to respond back that she concurs. Once she has concurred with that, then that bill pay is established and the check goes out from the bank. Deposits. All deposits will be properly received, deposited, recorded, and reconciled by the financial secretary. So the treasurer writes the checks, the financial secretary makes the deposits. Non-financial officers are not to be involved in the depositing or recording of monies received. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have a fundraiser and your financial officers are not able to be there, that you can't have the fundraiser. It just means that those people at the fundraiser would take the money and count it. I suggest 2 people count it seal it in an envelope, and both of them sign across the seal of the envelope that they have received, same. And that envelope needs to be taken to your financial secretary as soon as possible. 1.6 talks about fixed assets. The expenditures are recorded at cost with depreciation. 1.7 says that the financial secretary will review and reconcile each statement on a monthly basis. Financial reports and reconciliation reports must be available to the board and or the membership to review. These can be done at a meeting of the chapter or department by handing out copies or by sending the mail by email to all members of the organization, meaning your chapter or department. The public can also request these reports and should receive them promptly upon request. 1.10 talks about the chapter name and of a new chapter, and that once they get the name approved, they'll apply for an employer identification number. Once the charter is given to the chapter, they are not allowed to make any changes to the name. 1.11 says that each chapter or department, with the exception of the Gavel Club, must have a post office box. The only exception to that is that if you have a permanent address, meaning a Legion or a VFW or DAV, you could use them as a permanent address, but the sidebar on that is that you would have to wait until the person in charge of that organization is able to give you your mail. Your P.O. box, it should be expense should be a permanent part of your annual budget. Now, what happens if your chapter needs to change the P.O. box? You need to put in a forwarding order with the post office. You need to update the profile in the chapter information form. You need to update the EIN report on the national website, and you need to notify the IRS Form 8822B and any respective state agencies with which your chapter or department is registered with. 1.12 talks about uncashed checks. It outlines a policy for what to do when a check is not cashed after 90 days, 180 days, and 200 days. After 200 days, if you've had no communication with the person to whom you've given the check, those funds will revert back to the issuing organization, chapter, department, or national, with no further claim to payment. The payee is a vendor. The original check will be voided. Notice will be given that this has occurred, and it talks about a procedure for dealing with such laws as your state may have with regard to unclaimed property. So be sure that you are aware of those. 1.13 talks about non-sufficient funds. Anytime your chapter receives one of those, this procedure talks about that whoever gives you the check with non-sufficient funds should be notified promptly and should be asked to give your chapter or department the amount of money of the check plus any associated bank charges within 15 days. And a membership status can be placed on hold if an outstanding check occurs. 1.14 talks about accounting and financial records. There is a backup that needs to be on all online documentation. So if you have your chapter's financials on an Excel spreadsheet, make sure that it is backed up to either the cloud, to a external hard drive, to a memory stick, so that that information can be retrieved if there should be a failure of the computer. At the end of the year, all financial records are stored with the recording secretary, according to 1.14.2. 1.14.3 talks about outgoing officers need to surrender all financial records at the end of their term to the incoming officers. 1.14.4 talks about logo usage. Upon approval of the national president to use the BSMA logo, the 25% net proceeds from the department, the chapter, or the auxiliary permitted logo sales should be submitted to the National Financial Secretary at least annually by August 15th with a report indicating a detail of gross proceeds, the cost, along with the statement of intent to end or extend the project. So as an example, if you get the national president's approval to use the logo on a shirt your chapter is selling, shirt costs you $10, you're selling it for $20, you would owe national 25% of your profit, which is $10, so you'd owe $2.50 for each shirt you sold. 2.0 talks about an annual budget. It is recommended that each chapter, department, or auxiliary prepare a budget for approval by the membership annually. 2.2 says general financial accounting, restricted and unrestricted funds are what your treasury will be made up of. Unrestricted are donations that are given to you with no particular cause for which they need to be used. Restricted, the donor may restrict it by writing it on the check, sending you a note or a letter telling you that those funds must be used for that particular purpose and no other. The donor can restrict the funds and only the donor can unrestrict the funds. Outside of that, all your funds in the organization must be in the expense category, must be reported as program, meaning our mission, our veterans, our military, and the families of the fallen. Management, things like stamps, paper, and fundraising is self-explanatory. 2.2.1 talks about accrual is a type of accounting we use. So we record those revenues and expenses when they're incurred, regardless of when they are cashed. 2.3 talks a little more in detail about the restriction of funds, but just suffice it to know that the donor restricts and the donor can unrestrict. If you're having problems using the funds for the intent that the donor gives you, then it might be wise to call the donor, let them know that, and have them unrestrict the funds in writing to a project that you might suggest to them. 2.4 talks about chapter grants. There are chapter grants available each year in the amount of $250 to each new chapter upon application and to an existing chapter every 2 years for a special project. You will find the application for the chapter grant on the financial portion of the national website. And just remember, you get the funds in advance of the project, not after you've done the project. 3.0 talks about the debit card. The standard limit per day with the national organization is $3,000, and that can be upped during convention because sometimes our expenses per day run more than that. 3.1.2 is a very important piece of this. The treasurer and the financial secretary on any level of the organization will be the sole holders of the cards, the debit cards, at all times. There are to be no credit cards, and they are the only authorized users. They are not to loan their card to someone else. They will use it and maintain complete control of it. On the national level, the debit card can be used for travel, accommodations, convention related expenses, and other business purchases, such as postage, ink, paper, equipment replacement, all required to conduct the business of the organization. 3.1.4 talks about airline and hotel reservations for the national level. 3.1.5 talks about no rental cars, and that applies to all levels of the organization. The debit card is to meet all transparency criteria. Must be how the debit card is used must be spelled out in your reports to your membership. 3.1.7 talks about the things that the debit card can be used on the national level to pay that are pre-approved for payment by the authority of the national president. 3.1.8 talks about a 30-day refund policy. 3.1.9 talks about good standing requirement. For your chapter, department, or auxiliary to receive any funds that are due it from the national organization, they must be in good standing, meaning compliance documentation must be done and the chapter is in good standing with the national organization. Excuse me. 3.2 talks about authorized national reimbursements. 3.2.1 talks about the president's reimbursements. 3.2.2 talks about the recording secretary and the financial officers. Total reimbursements are not to exceed the convention body approved budgeted items unless pre-approved by the Finance Committee and the National Executive Board. All expenses and receipts must be submitted prior to payment. So talks about 3.2.3, the chaplain, patriotic instructor, and other NEB members. Now 3.2.6 says that there is an ambassador fund where sometimes we send national executive officers out to help chapters. 3.3 talks about something that would require the National Executive Board's approval over and above. 3.4 talks about expenditures not authorized, meals, internet fees, convention meal tickets, unless the meals are included in the convention agenda, travel insurance, advance booking, boarding, cabin upgrade or seat selections, and hotel amenities. This would apply to your chapters, departments, and auxiliary who have members at convention representing them. 3.5 talks about an accountable plan. An officer or member traveling for the purpose of fulfilling pre-approved official BSA responsibilities may be entitled to reimbursement under section 3.2. Now, 3.5.1 is a very important section. Our accountant and our National Executive Board and Finance Committee are in agreement that mileage may be approved at 14 cents per mile, which is the charitable rate in accordance with IRS section 170. The documentation for this must meet the following requirement. Travel by vehicle, reimbursement, or allowances are only authorized for expenses paid or incurred by the officer or member in connection with performing approved services. For example, a chapter president may take everyone down to the VA to play bingo, and if the chapter funds allow and she could put in for 14 cents a mile for the trip there and the trip back. Substantiation of reimbursed expenses via an expense report, diary, log sheet, detailed receipt, or similar record within a reasonable period of time after the expenses are paid or incurred. Any personal mileage as opposed to BSMA purpose mileage should be indicated and subtracted. The documentation should show the purpose of the trip, the time and place of the travel, showing the beginning and ending odometer receipts, fuel receipts, but claims cannot include general repair and maintenance, nor fixed costs such as depreciation, the make, model of the year used, and a route map, like a Google map that shows how many miles are between point A and point B. 3.5.2 says if you're going to turn in a receipt, you need to do it within 60 days of the expense being incurred. 3.5.3, if you are traveling by car as opposed to air, you are entitled to get reimbursement not to exceed the amount that would have been paid via a common carrier with 21 days notice. 4.0 talks about the events with number 1, the National Convention. The sitting president selects the city, state, and hotel no later than March of the year of the convention. The national president shall make all arrangements for hotel expenses to be paid. The current president shall receive travel and lodging for up to 6 nights and complimentary registration fee. The national president is allowed up to 2 complimentary guest lunches and banquet tickets. The other people that sit on the National Executive Board are entitled to 6 nights lodging based upon 2 per room and their travel to and from the site of the convention, plus their registration fee. If someone is lodging with someone other than another member of the National Executive Board, National will pay the 1/2 proportionate share of the room. 4.1.5, the speaker and dignitary complimentary tickets, complimentary lunch and banquet tickets shall be extended to convention speakers and visiting dignitaries, including 1 guest each. If they bring more than that, then they will need to provide the ticket price to the national organization for any guest outside of 1. At convention, whenever possible, we should have a store where the merchandise that's in the online store is available for on-site purchase. Outside vendors at convention pay $50 for a vendor table, and individual members or chapters pay $25. These are based on availability. Selling or taking orders from rooms other than the vendor room is prohibited unless the vendor fee has been paid. If you're found in violation of this, a $50 fine will be imposed. Two auxiliaries, the National Gavel Club, which is the past national presidents, and the National Big Dipper, are given a vendor table at convention free of charge. The National Treasurer may be reimbursed for fuel, parking, and tolls incurred in transporting the online store and inventory to and from convention. 4.1.7 talks about the silent auction. All proceeds from the silent auction at convention will be rolled over to next year's convention. 4.1.8 talks about chapter delegates to convention. Chapters may reimburse or pay on behalf of their convention delegates from chapter funds, convention registration fee, convention offered meals for delegates only, meaning if a meal is included in convention registration, that is acceptable. Associated travel expenses to and from convention and lodging at convention based on 2 per room, not to exceed 6 nights. 4.12 talks about our attendance at Gold Star Mother's Day, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and American Gold Star Mother's National Convention, where our national president will be going to those events as our representative. 4.2.1 talks about wreaths that our national treasurer will procure for presentation at Arlington on behalf of our organization. Flowers for other memorials may be purchased from street vendors by the national president along with a receipt. She may be reimbursed. And it talks about what they can be reimbursed for. The national president or her representative at these events may be reimbursed for lodging and travel expenses for attending the Gold Star Mother's Day weekend, American Gold Star Mothers National Convention, Veterans Day, Memorial Day weekend, and department convention. Gold Star Mother's Day weekend, the president will receive travel and 3 nights lodging. The president and 1 other national officer will receive travel and 3 nights lodging, 2 per room at the American Gold Star Mothers National Convention. Veterans Day, the president, historian, patriotic instructor, and DC rep will receive travel and 3 nights lodging based on 2 per room. And Memorial Day, the president, historian, patriotic instructor, and DC rep will receive 4 nights and travel based on 2 per room. At the department convention, the president will receive travel and 3 nights lodging if it's not furnished by the respective department. Each year, our National Executive Board meets at mid-year. Each member will receive lodging, 2 per room for not more than 4 nights, and travel to and from the location of the mid-year Executive Board meeting. Sometimes there are special events, and some members of the NEB are invited to attend special events. This event must be approved by the National Executive Board, and total reimbursement is not to exceed the convention body approved budget amounts unless approved by the Finance Committee and then approved also by the NEB. All receipts must be submitted prior to reimbursement. 4.5 is very important. If your chapter department or auxiliary wants to have a game of chance, first of all, you must follow the IRS rules, but most importantly, your local and state laws regarding raffles, bingos, lotteries. They must maintain all records and file all state required reports associated with these games of chance. If you have any questions about this in any regard, then please contact your state Secretary of State, state gaming associations, and make sure you are fully registered and you know the reporting requirements. We currently have two auxiliaries. 5.0 talks about the Gavel Club and the Big Dipper, and they are required to maintain their records and follow all procedures in here. 5.2 talks about annual compliance. Your chapter is required between September 1 and usually the ending date is December 1 to take care of all documents that are a part of it. You will receive detailed instructions each year from the fourth VP, and she and other members of the National Executive Board stand ready, willing, and able to help you with this. But all of this must be completed by December 1st, including filing your 990N postcard with the IRS. 6.0 contingent delegates may approve a donation of $1,500 or up to 45% of the annual net income to 501c3 organizations supporting our mission. If the National BSA-MA organization is financially stable, the $1,500 or up to 45% of the annual net income donation is to be allocated equally to up to 3 different 501c3s chosen by the convention body. The actual amount they'll get will be based on the year-end audited financials. BAVS. BSMA may match up to 100% of the VA, meaning Veterans Affairs Voluntary Services Fund donations received by chapters contingent on availability of funds. 6.3 talks about women in military service. For the last few years, we've been giving them a donation rather than a wreath. 7.0 talks about membership fees. Membership dues are currently set at $30 per member. If a member joins the chapter after June 1 of any given year, their payment will be credited for the upcoming fiscal year. 7.2 at the time of compliance, chapters will contribute to the National BSMA BAVS Fund of $45 or more. Department and chapter charter fees. Each newly forming department or chapter will submit a chartering fee of $25 to the National be submitted with their charter application. Make sure each year that your departments, your chapters, and your auxiliaries read through the financial policies, making note of what has changed, and that your new financial officers of each year read through these policies and they come to our national treasurer or our national financial secretary for guidance if there are questions. Thank you for your time and attention.